I wanted to chat with you guys about lupus a little. It's been a rough morning. The kids drove me nuts today, and they just drive me nuts. Kids are fun. Both of them are not feeling too good, so they're super irritable, super cranky, so that's always fun. But I wanted to come on here because in honor of World Lupus Day, I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about myself. And it was just so much easier to share it live than via write it, because it would have been written forever. So over 10 years ago, I started losing a lot of my hair. I started having a lot of body aches, a lot of discomforts in my body, a lot of things that were limiting my everyday living.
7 years have passed, yet the name Chris Watts still sends a chill through the public imagination. The case was supposed to have ended in 2018, when the court handed down its verdict and the world moved on. But the truth is, this story never ended. It continues to echo, a haunting reminder of how fragile family life can be, how quickly love can collapse into betrayal, and how impossible it is to fully understand the choices that led to annihilation. Unlike other tragedies, this one remains alive in the digital world. Shanann's videos, the bright, hopeful clips of a mother laughing with her daughters, still circulate online, replayed millions of times. They show joy, but in hindsight, they feel like warnings. Chris's name still floods internet forums, true crime channels, and social media threads. Letters, interviews, and conspiracy theories keep the story moving, twisting, reshaping itself in the collective mind. It has become more than a case file. It is a cultural obsession. Why? Because it leaves us unsettled. The official narrative, a husband killing his wife, his daughters, and their unborn son for the illusion of a new life, should be enough. But the contradictions, the unanswered questions, and the digital traces left behind refuse to let this case rest. We are left with the cold reality of facts, but also the unbearable silence of what still doesn't make sense. 7 years later, the Watts case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about family, secrecy, and the masks we wear. It reminds us that social media can project happiness while hiding despair. That silence in a marriage can be as destructive as shouting. And that one person's weakness can devastate generations. This documentary is not about retelling the night of August 13, 2018. That story has been told, retold, and dissected until it became numb. This is about what came before and what lingers after, the overlooked details, the contradictions in confession, the long shadows cast by betrayal, and the haunting legacy that refuses to fade. 7 years later, we ask, what's really happening in the Chris Watts case? And why does it still hold us in its grip? Every great tragedy begins with small fractures, and in the Watts case, one of those fractures was an affair. By the summer of 2018, Chris Watts was entangled in a relationship with a coworker named Nico. On the surface, it looked like a typical midlife escape, a man seeking validation outside his marriage, drawn to the thrill of secrecy. But in hindsight, it became the most visible thread investigators and the public pulled on when trying to make sense of the unthinkable. Nico's role has been endlessly debated. She testified that she believed Chris was separated, that divorce papers were imminent, that she was being introduced to a man on the cusp of a new beginning. And yet, her phone records revealed something more complicated. In the weeks before the murders, she searched for wedding dresses. She looked up Amber Fry, the mistress who helped expose Scott Peterson, another man who murdered his pregnant wife. She Googled how to prepare for life with a man leaving his family. Were these the daydreams of someone falling too fast, or signs she knew more than she admitted? Public judgment has not been kind. Some believe she was deceived, an unwitting accomplice to a fantasy built on lies. Others believe she was more aware, that the timing of her searches hints at a chilling proximity to the truth. 7 years later, her name still hovers over the case, her silence interpreted as guilt by some, self-preservation by others. She disappeared from public view, leaving only speculation in her wake. What is certain is that Chris's affair with Nico became the accelerant for a fire already smoldering. It offered him the illusion of a clean slate, a life without responsibility, a life where he was not weighed down by debt, family conflict, or the demands of fatherhood. In her presence, he was not the quiet husband slipping away from his wife. He was the man of her attention, a man reinvented. But affairs alone do not explain annihilation. Millions stray, very few commit the unthinkable. That is the unanswered riddle of the Watts case. Did Chris kill because he desired freedom, or because he could not bear the collapse of the fantasy he had built? Did the affair expose his weakness, or did it merely reveal what was already there? 7 years later, the mistress remains a shadowed figure. She is both catalyst and question mark, the living reminder that what drew Chris away from his family was not just another woman, but the intoxicating promise of escape. If Chris's affair revealed his escape, Shanann's phone revealed her reality. Long before investigators pieced together timelines and testimonies, Shanann had already written her own diary, not in pen and paper, but in text messages, emails, and endless social media updates. 7 years later, these digital traces form one of the most haunting archives in true crime. To the outside world, Shanann was radiant. Her Facebook videos showed a smiling mother, proud of her daughters, full of gratitude for her husband, hopeful about her growing family. She spoke often of resilience, of surviving illness, of building a life through sheer determination. Her digital persona was one of optimism. But her private texts tell another story. They reveal a woman in crisis, fighting to hold a marriage together while feeling it unravel in her hands. In messages to friends, she confessed the pain of rejection. She wrote about Chris's coldness, his lack of intimacy, his refusal to engage. She described his silence as suffocating. She sensed betrayal even before she had evidence of it. And when she finally spotted the suspicious charges on his bank account, she realized her intuition had been right all along. Her digital diary is devastating not only for what it reveals about the final weeks of her life, but for how clearly it foreshadowed the end. She told friends she felt unsafe, unloved, and abandoned. She feared he wanted out. She feared he was hiding something. These were not paranoid fantasies, they were truths only she could see, truths that became unbearable to carry alone. 7 years later, her videos remain online, endlessly replayed. Millions watch them not as cheerful family updates, but as artifacts of a tragedy. Every smile is reframed as a mask, every affectionate gesture as foreshadowing. Her posts, once meant to celebrate love, are now consumed as evidence of betrayal. She has become both a victim and a digital ghost, her presence frozen in time, her voice echoing long after it was silenced. And this raises a question for us, the audience, the consumers of true crime: are we preserving her memory, or exploiting her pain? Do we honor her by watching, or do we keep her trapped in an endless replay of her final days? Shanann's digital diary stands as both testimony and warning. It tells us of a woman who knew her marriage was crumbling, who fought to protect her family, who left behind not silence but words, videos, and evidence. And in that legacy, her voice continues to indict, long after her body was laid to rest. Confession is supposed to bring clarity, but in the case of Chris Watts, every confession brought only more confusion. From the very beginning, his words shifted like sand, each version rewriting the story of what happened and why. 7 years later, those contradictions remain one of the darkest mysteries of the case. His first account was denial. In the days after Shanann and the girls disappeared, Chris pleaded publicly for their safe return, telling cameras he wanted his family home.
If you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back.
Friend. The performance was calm, detached, almost robotic. To neighbors and viewers, something felt off. To investigators, it was the first sign of deceit. When confronted with evidence, he cracked. In his initial confession, Chris claimed that Shanann had killed the children, and that he, in a fit of rage, killed her in retaliation. It was a shocking accusation, shifting blame onto the woman who could no longer defend herself. Forensic evidence quickly disproved this, but the cruelty of that lie lingers. Even in admitting guilt, he sought to tarnish her memory. Later, faced with mounting evidence and a failed polygraph, he offered another confession. This time, he admitted to killing Shanann and the children himself. But even then, his details were murky. He described arguments, moments of rage, sudden impulses. He insisted it was not planned, that he simply snapped. Yet investigators had already uncovered searches, deleted messages, and signs that pointed to premeditation. Years later, in prison interviews, the contradictions deepened. He spoke of hearing voices, of being overtaken by dark thoughts he could not control. He described moments of clarity and moments of blankness. Each retelling became less about truth and more about manipulation, fragments of honesty stitched into fabrications that served only to cloud the record. Forensic experts point out that these contradictions are not accidental. Offenders often shift narratives to control how the world sees them. By first painting Shanann as the aggressor, then himself as a man who snapped, Chris positioned himself as less monstrous than reality demanded. In prison, when attention waned, he added eerie details, not to enlighten, but to keep his story alive. The heartbreak is that we may never know the full truth. Did he plan the murders days in advance, or did fantasy become action in a single night? Did he ever feel remorse, or only fear of being caught? What drove him, obsession, resentment, weakness, or something darker still? 7 years later, the contradictions remain. And perhaps that is the final cruelty. Not only did he destroy his family, but he also destroyed the possibility of understanding. His words, instead of clarifying, became another prison, one where the truth is locked away forever, leaving only speculation in its place. No marriage unravels in a single night. The collapse of Chris and Shanann's relationship was the result of years of quiet tensions, small resentments, and unresolved fractures. Long before the murders, there were fault lines running through their family, fault lines that widened until they could no longer be bridged. One of the most painful fractures lay between Shanann and Chris's parents. Their relationship had become strained, marked by disagreements that cut to the heart of parenting. The conflict over Cece's nut allergy, remembered now as Nutgate, may have looked trivial from the outside, but to Shanann it was proof that her children's safety was not taken seriously. When Chris's mother disregarded her warnings, Shanann felt not only dismissed but betrayed. She expected her husband to stand firmly by her side. Instead, he remained silent, unwilling to confront his family. That silence became a pattern. Shanann was outspoken, direct, unafraid to put her feelings into words. Chris withdrew. He met conflict with detachment, retreating into quiet rather than addressing the issues. To her, this was abandonment. To him, it was avoidance. Each silence created distance, and each confrontation deepened their divide. Financial stress only worsened the strain. They lived in a large house, but beneath the surface, bills piled up. Bankruptcy and debt had shadowed their marriage before, and the pressure of supporting a family of 4, soon to be 5, weighed heavily. For Shanann, financial stability was another battle she tried to fight through optimism and work, her Thrive business, her constant drive to build security. For Chris, it was another reason to disappear inward, to dream of escape. Friends of Shanann later said she felt alone in her own marriage, carrying the weight of love, children, and survival almost entirely by herself. Her texts reveal that loneliness with devastating clarity. She wanted to fix what was broken, to fight for what she believed in. But she was met with indifference. Chris's passivity was not neutral, it was corrosive. It told her, again and again, that she was fighting for a marriage her husband had already abandoned in his heart. 7 years later, we can see these tensions not as excuses but as context. They remind us that the Watts tragedy was not only about an affair or a sudden act of violence. It was about years of silence, unspoken resentments, and fractures left unhealed. The silent collapse of this marriage is as haunting as the crime itself. Because it shows us how love can die long before life does, how indifference can wound as deeply as betrayal, and how a family can disintegrate not with shouting, but with silence. 7 years later, Chris Watts lives in a cell more than 1,000 miles away from the house in Frederick where his family once lived. The trial is over, the sentence final, multiple life terms without parole. Yet even behind prison walls, the story did not end. In some ways, it became stranger. In the years since his conviction, Chris has been both isolated and obsessed over. Reports from inside prison describe a man who keeps to himself, who avoids attention, who works quietly at menial jobs. But outside those walls, letters pour in. Hundreds of them. Some filled with hatred, condemning him as a monster. Others disturbingly adoring, written by women who call him handsome, who send him photographs, who imagine they could be the ones to save him. This paradox, reviled by many, desired by some, reflects society's complicated relationship with evil. For every person who sees him as the embodiment of betrayal, there is another who romanticizes his infamy. And so Chris's prison life is haunted by a correspondence he neither deserves nor rejects. He has become a figure people project themselves onto, a screen for obsession. But the letters are only part of the aftermath. Chris himself has contributed to the case's persistence. In prison interviews, he has given yet more contradictory stories, adding lurid details, describing his thoughts in ways that seem designed less to clarify and more to keep himself relevant. Each time he speaks, the public listens, hoping for answers. Each time, the contradictions only deepen. Meanwhile, Shanann's memory has taken on another life entirely. Her videos, still online, have become a kind of digital shrine. Strangers scroll through her posts, hearing her voice, watching her laugh with her daughters. These clips, once meant for friends and family, are now consumed by millions as a window into the life that was destroyed. It is a form of mourning, but also of obsession. The family's most intimate moments have become eternal content. And then there are the conspiracy theories. On forums and YouTube channels, people dissect every detail, from doorbell footage to the timing of texts, searching for hidden accomplices or secret motives. Some question Nico Kessinger's role. Others doubt the official timeline altogether. In this way, the case lives on, not only in grief, but in speculation. 7 years later, the haunting aftermath is not just the absence of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. It is the way their story has been consumed, distorted, and endlessly replayed. The tragedy has become both a warning and an obsession, shaping how we talk about betrayal, family, and the darkness that can hide inside ordinary walls. And in the quiet of his prison cell, Chris Watts remains at the center of it all, a man whose crimes will never be forgotten, whose silence will never give peace, and whose existence is a constant reminder of the questions we still cannot answer. 7 years have passed, yet the questions surrounding the Watts case remain louder than the answers. The facts are fixed: a wife, 2 daughters, and an unborn son were murdered by the man meant to protect them. The law has spoken, the sentence is final. And yet, beneath the official record, contradictions and mysteries refuse to rest. The first question is motive. Was this annihilation premeditated, or the result of a sudden break? Chris has insisted at times that he snapped during an argument. But the digital record, the secret searches, the financial planning, the fantasies of escape, suggests calculation. He researched new apartments, looked up song lyrics about freedom, and envisioned a life with Nico Kessinger long before the murders. Was this evidence of intent, or the delusions of a weak man living in fantasy? The second question concerns complicity. Did anyone else know more than they admitted? Nico has insisted she was deceived, that she believed Chris was separated, that she was horrified by the truth. Investigators never found evidence of her involvement. And yet, her searches, for wedding dresses, for Amber Fry, for starting fresh, remain unsettling. Was she merely daydreaming, or had she seen enough to suspect the storm brewing? 7 years later, the debate rages on, and her silence has only fueled the speculation. The third question is psychological. What drives a man not only to betray but to destroy? Psychologists point to a fragile personality, to narcissism, to an inability to face failure without resorting to erasure. But no diagnosis explains the obliteration of 3 children, a pregnant wife, an entire future. Evil is often explained in categories, but in this case, it remains terrifyingly unexplainable. The fourth question is ours: why do we remain so obsessed? Perhaps it is because the Watts family looked so normal. They lived in a quiet suburb, posted smiling family photos, projected stability. Their life looked like ours, and if this could happen behind their closed doors, what secrets might exist behind others? The case unsettles because it suggests that darkness can live inside the ordinary, that betrayal can wear the mask of love until the moment it destroys everything. 7 years later, the contradictions of confession, the role of the mistress, the psychology of betrayal, and the haunting digital legacy leave us without resolution. We return again and again not because we find answers, but because the questions gnaw at us. And perhaps that is the final tragedy. That Shanann's voice, her children's laughter, and the lives they should have lived are now forever overshadowed by the mystery of why. 7 years later, the Watts case endures not because of its verdict, but because of its echoes. The crime itself is fixed in history, but the questions, the contradictions, and the digital remains continue to haunt us. Shanann's videos still circulate, her voice preserved in the endless scroll of social media. To watch them now is to witness joy wrapped in tragedy, hope wrapped in betrayal. Every clip is a reminder of what was lost, and of how the digital world never allows us to let go. Chris remains in prison, but his name has not faded. Letters arrive. Theories multiply. His story refuses to sink into silence, because we keep pulling it back up, desperate to make sense of something that cannot be explained. Perhaps that is why this case lingers, not because it offers clarity, but because it denies it. We see in it the fragility of family, the peril of silence, and the danger of believing that love can be replaced by escape. The Watts case is not just about what happened in 2018. It is about what remains in 2025, digital ghosts, unanswered questions, and the uncomfortable truth that some stories will never find peace. If this story has left you shaken, you are not alone. The Watts case is more than a crime, it is a mirror of the fragility of trust, the silence that can destroy, and the unanswered questions we may never resolve. 7 years later, the lessons remain urgent: to listen more closely, to see beyond appearances, and to remember the voices that can no longer speak for themselves. If you want more investigations like this, stories told with care, precision, and honesty, stay with us. Subscribe, share this documentary, and join the conversation in the comments. Your voice matters in keeping these memories alive, and in demanding that such tragedies are never forgotten.